I dumped my poor boyfriend for a billionaire, but everything changed when my new lover saw my ex across the room and whispered, "If he sees you with me, we're both dead." I used to think that love was enough to sustain a person, but that was back when I was young, naive, and hadn't yet tasted the cold, hard reality of looking at a stack of past due bills on a kitchen table that we'd bought from a thrift store. My name is Maya, and for 5 years I was the girl who lived in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment with a man named Elias. Elias was the kind of guy people call the salt of the earth. He was a carpenter, a man whose hands were always calloused and smelled faintly of cedar and sweat. He loved me with a quiet, steady intensity that I used to find comforting. He would bring me wildflowers he'd picked from the side of the road and tell me that one day he'd build us a house with his own 2 hands. But as the years crawled by, one day started to feel like a fairy tale I no longer believed in. While my former college classmates were posting photos from penthouses in Dubai or showing off engagement rings that cost more than Elias made in 3 years, I was clipping coupons and wondering if we could afford to turn on the heater in November. I started to resent the sawdust on the floor. I started to resent his optimism. I didn't want a hand-built home in 20 years. I wanted a life that didn't feel like a constant struggle for air. I wanted status. I wanted to be the woman people looked at with envy, not pity. That's when I met Julian. He was everything Elias wasn't. Julian was the CEO of a venture capital firm, a man who moved through the world with the polished grace of someone who had never had to worry about the price of a gallon of milk. We met at a high-end gallery opening I had practically scammed my way into, wearing a dress I'd planned to return the next morning. When Julian looked at me, he didn't see a girl struggling to make ends meet. He saw a beautiful woman who belonged in his world. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I could finally stop swimming against the current. The breakup with Elias was brutal, mostly because he didn't fight me. He just stood there in our tiny kitchen, his shoulders slumped, looking at me with those honest, heartbroken eyes. I told him I needed more. I told him I was tired of being poor. I told him that his love wasn't enough to fill the void of my ambitions. He didn't yell. He didn't call me a gold digger, though I knew that's what I sounded like. He just whispered, "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Maya. I just hope the price isn't more than you can pay." I packed my bags and moved into Julian's glass-walled mansion that very night, leaving behind the smell of cedar for the scent of expensive cologne and imported marble. For the first 6 months, I was convinced I had made the greatest trade in history. My life became a whirlwind of black-tie galas, private jets, and designer labels. I had a credit card with no limit and a closet the size of my old apartment. Julian treated me like a prize, a beautiful ornament to show off at his side. I convinced myself that the hollowness I felt when I looked in the mirror was just a side effect of leveling up. I was happy, wasn't I? I had the status I had craved. I was finally someone. Julian was a powerful man, and I loved the way doors opened for him. He was decisive, cold, and calculated, traits I admired because they were so far removed from Elias's soft-heartedness. But as the honeymoon phase began to fade, I started noticing things. The way Julian spoke to the staff wasn't just firm, it was cruel. The way his friends looked at me wasn't with envy, but with a strange, fleeting sort of pity that I couldn't quite place. And then there were the phone calls, hushed late-night conversations in his study that ended abruptly the moment I walked into the room. Whenever I asked him about work, Julian would just pat my hand and tell me not to worry my pretty little head about it. He told me my only job was to look beautiful and keep him happy. At first, it was a relief not to have to worry about finances, but soon the golden cage started to feel very, very small. I realized I didn't actually know anything about the man I had abandoned my life for. I didn't know where his money really came from, or why he had 3 different passports tucked away in a locked drawer in his desk. One evening, Julian announced we were attending an exclusive underground charity auction. It wasn't the kind of event you saw in the newspapers. It was held in a secluded estate upstate, guarded by men with earpieces and cold expressions. Julian was in a particularly good mood, whispering in my ear about a big acquisition he was planning to finalize that night. I felt a surge of pride. This was it, the pinnacle of the high society I had sacrificed everything for. I wore a gown that cost $40,000, dripping in diamonds Julian had gifted me for our anniversary. When we arrived, the air was thick with the smell of expensive cigars and old money. I scanned the room, looking for familiar faces among the elite, but everyone seemed to be wearing a mask of practiced indifference. Julian left me at the bar to go speak with some business associates in a private lounge. I stood there, sipping vintage champagne, feeling the weight of the diamonds around my neck. I felt like a queen. As I turned to survey the room, my eyes landed on a man standing near the grand staircase. He was dressed in a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, looking every bit as wealthy and powerful as the men surrounding him. But there was something about the way he held himself, the set of his shoulders, the way his hand gripped his glass. My heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be. I moved closer, my breath catching in my throat. The man turned slightly, catching the light, and my blood turned to ice. It was Elias. But he wasn't the sawdust-covered carpenter I had left behind. He looked more refined, more dangerous, and more affluent than anyone in the room. He was talking to a man I recognized as a high-ranking government official, and they were speaking as equals. Just as I was about to call out his name, a hand gripped my arm with bruising force. I spun around to see Julian, his face pale and his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and genuine terror I had never seen before. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring straight at Elias. "Don't move," Julian hissed, his voice trembling. "Don't even look at him. If he sees you with me, we're both dead." Julian's grip on my arm was so tight I could feel my pulse thrumming against his fingers. His face, usually a mask of cold arrogance, was slick with a fine sheen of sweat that made his expensive foundation streak. I had never seen him afraid. Not when a multi-million-dollar deal fell through, not when he was threatened by competitors. But looking at Elias, Julian looked like a man who had just seen his own executioner. "Julian, you're hurting me," I hissed, trying to pry his fingers off. "What are you talking about? That's Elias. He's a carpenter. He was my boyfriend for 5 years. He doesn't have a dime to his name." Julian pulled me into the shadows of a heavy velvet curtain, his eyes darting around the room as if he expected snipers to emerge from the rafters. "A carpenter," he whispered, his voice cracking with a frantic, hysterical edge. "Maya, you idiot! That man isn't a carpenter. That is Elias Thorne. He's the silent architect behind the Sovereign Fund. Half the men in this room owe their fortunes to him, and the other half are terrified that he'll decide to ruin them tomorrow morning. He's not just wealthy, he's the source." The world felt like it was tilting on its axis. I looked back through the gap in the curtains. Elias was standing with a glass of sparkling water, nodding calmly as the Minister of Finance leaned in to whisper something in his ear. The minister was laughing, a submissive, eager sound, while Elias remained poised, his face a mask of polite indifference. This wasn't the man who had spent his Saturdays fixing the neighbor's fence for free. This wasn't the man who saved up for 6 months just to buy me a second-hand coat for winter. No, I stammered, the diamonds around my neck suddenly feeling like a lead weight. He lived in a one-bedroom apartment. He smelled like sawdust. He cried when our cat died. He's not some power player. He's a man who values privacy and character above all else, Julian snapped, his eyes finally locking onto mine with a look of pure loathing. He grew up in a family with more old money than God, but he walked away from it to see if he could build something real, to see if he could find someone who loved him for who he was, not what he had. And you were his great experiment, weren't you? The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. The one day he had promised me, the house he said he'd build with his own hands, it wasn't a pipe dream. It was a choice. He had been testing the world, or perhaps he had just been trying to live a life that felt honest before the gravity of his inheritance pulled him back in. And I had failed the test in the most spectacular, shallow way possible. I looked down at my $40,000 dress. I had traded a man who was a king in disguise for a man who was merely a courtier, playing at being a prince. Julian's status, his mansion, his cars, they were all toys compared to the raw, quiet power Elias was radiating from across the room. "We have to leave," Julian said, grabbing my hand again. "If he sees me with you, he'll think I'm the reason you left him. He'll think I stole you. He'll liquidate my firm by sunrise just to spite me. I didn't know, Maya. If I had known you were his, I never would have looked at you." "I'm not his," I yelled, though I kept my voice low. "I'm a person, not a piece of property." "In this room, you're a liability," Julian hissed. But it was too late. The crowd began to shift as the auctioneer took the stage, and the natural flow of the bodies pushed us back out into the open. I tried to hide behind a tall floral arrangement, but the light from the crystal chandeliers seemed to follow me, mocking me. I felt a gaze on the back of my neck, a steady, heavy pressure that I recognized instantly. I turned slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Elias was looking directly at me. He didn't look angry. He didn't look surprised. He just looked at me with a profound, soul-crushing disappointment. He raised his glass slightly, a silent toast to the woman who couldn't wait for one day. Beside me, Julian was trembling so hard I thought he might collapse. He tried to put on a brave face, forced a smile, and gave a stiff nod toward Elias. Elias didn't nod back. He simply turned his attention to the stage, dismissing us as if we were nothing more than a minor annoyance. The auction began, but I couldn't hear a word the auctioneer was saying. My mind was a whirlwind of what-ifs. If I had stayed another month, another week, would he have told me? Or was my departure the very thing that drove him back into this cold, golden world? I had wanted status so badly that I had walked away from the man who actually owned the ladder. As the night wore on, Julian's desperation became palpable. He started drinking heavily, downing glasses of scotch as if they were water. He kept muttering about damage control and making it right. I realized then that Julian didn't care about me at all. I wasn't his partner. I was a ticking time bomb that threatened his position in the hierarchy. "I have to talk to him," I said, a sudden spark of defiance lighting up in my chest. "Are you insane?" Julian grabbed my wrist, his face turning a dark, mottled red. "You stay here. You don't breathe in his direction." "I spent 5 years with that man, Julian. He's not going to hurt me." "He won't hurt you," Julian snarled, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low pitch. "He'll hurt me. And if my world goes down, Maya, I'm making sure you're the first thing I throw overboard. I stared at him, seeing the ugly truth of the man I had chosen. There was no love here. There was only a transaction. I was an asset that had suddenly become a debt. I wrenched my arm away from him and began to walk toward the VIP section where Elias sat. My heels clicked on the marble floor, sounding like a countdown. The security guard started to move toward me, but Elias raised a single hand, and they instantly stepped back. He was watching me approach, his expression unreadable. I stopped a few feet away from him. Up close, I could see the subtle changes. The tuxedo was bespoke. The watch on his wrist cost more than our old apartment building, and his eyes, they were colder than I remembered. "Elias," I whispered, my voice trembling. He looked at me for a long moment, the silence between us stretching until it felt like it would break. Finally, he spoke. His voice was the same, deep and resonant, but the warmth was gone. "You look beautiful, Maya," he said, his gaze sweeping over my designer gown and the diamonds Julian had given me. "The lifestyle seems to suit you. I assume the diamonds were worth the price." "It wasn't about the diamonds," I lied, though the words tasted like ash. I felt like we were going nowhere. "I didn't know, Elias. Why didn't you tell me?" Elias leaned back in his leather chair, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Because I wanted to see if you'd stay for the carpenter. Because the man who builds a house with his hands is the same man who runs $1 billion fund, Maya. The only thing that changed was the bank account. But I suppose to you, that was the only thing that mattered." Before I could respond, the auctioneer's voice boomed over the speakers. "And now, for our final item of the evening, a unique opportunity, the debt and controlling interest of Julian Vance's investment firm." My blood ran cold. I turned to look at the stage, then back at Elias. He was holding a small remote in his hand, his finger hovering over a button. "Julian's firm?" I gasped. "What are you doing?" Elias leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear, just like it used to be when we curled up on our old, lumpy mattress. But his words were ice. "I'm not just the guest of honor, Maya," he whispered. "I'm the one who called in his margins. And since you love status so much, I thought you'd like to watch the exact moment your new life becomes worth absolutely nothing." The auctioneer's gavel struck the podium with a sound like a gunshot. The room went silent, a predatory stillness settling over the audience of titans. Julian's investment firm, the very foundation of his identity and the source of the life I had stepped into, was being liquidated in front of the world's most powerful people. And the man behind the curtain, the one pulling the strings of the entire financial execution, was the man I had once laughed at for having wood shavings in his hair. Julian lunged forward, his face a distorted mask of grief and fury. "You can't do this!" he screamed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "The margins weren't due for another month. You manipulated the market." Elias didn't even turn his head. He remained seated, his posture relaxed, one leg crossed over the other. "Business is about timing, Julian," he said quietly, though his voice seemed to carry further than Julian's shouting. "You should have checked who held your subprime debt before you decided to leverage your lifestyle against it. You built your empire on a foundation of sand. I simply provided the tide." I watched, frozen, as security guards in charcoal suits moved toward Julian. They didn't use force, not yet, but their presence was a wall. Julian turned his gaze to me, and the look in his eyes made me want to shrink into the floorboards. It wasn't love. It wasn't even the possessive lust he usually showed. It was a cold, calculating venom. "You!" he hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This is your fault. You brought him into my life. You were the one who kept talking about your simple past, making me think you were just some nobody I could pick up. You were a Trojan horse." "I didn't know," I cried, the diamonds around my neck feeling like they were tightening into a noose. "Julian, I swear, I had no idea who he was." "It doesn't matter," a new voice said. I turned to see a woman in a sharp navy suit standing next to Elias. She was holding a tablet and looking at me with the professional indifference of an auditor. "Mr. Thorne, the transfer is complete. The Vance Group is now a subsidiary of the Sovereign Fund. We've already begun the asset seizure." "Asset seizure?" I whispered. Elias finally stood up. He walked toward me, stopping just inches away. He was so close I could smell the faint, lingering scent of cedar, a scent I now realized came from the bespoke chest in his study, not a workshop. He reached out and touched the large diamond pendant hanging from my neck. "These," he said, his voice low and intimate, "were bought with a loan Julian took out 6 months ago, a loan he defaulted on this morning. Technically, Maya, you are wearing property that belongs to me." The humiliation was a physical heat rising in my cheeks. I reached up to unhook the clasp, my fingers fumbling and shaking. "Take them. Take everything. I don't want any of it." "Oh, I intend to," Elias said. But he wasn't looking at the jewelry. He was looking at Julian, who was currently being restrained by security as he tried to rush the stage. "But there's a problem, Maya. You see, Julian didn't just lose his money. In his desperate attempt to stay afloat and keep you in the style you demanded, he engaged in some creative accounting, wire fraud, embezzlement, the kind of things the federal government takes a very personal interest in." My heart stopped. What does that have to do with me? Julian let out a hysterical laugh from across the room. "Tell her, Elias. Tell your little trophy what I did." Elias looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flash of the man I had loved, the man who had picked wildflowers for me. But it was gone in the blink of an eye, replaced by a crystalline hardness. "Julian signed the offshore accounts in your name, Maya. He told the bank you were the primary beneficiary and the one authorizing the transfers. He used your identity to shield himself." I felt the floor drop out from under me. I had wanted status. I had wanted a name that meant something. And now my name was on documents that would lead to a prison cell. I looked at Julian, who was grinning now, a jagged, broken expression. "If I'm going down, you're coming with me," Julian spat. "You wanted the lifestyle, Maya. Well, this is the part of the lifestyle they don't put on Instagram. The liability." I turned back to Elias, pleading. "Elias, please. You know I didn't do this. I don't even know how to read a balance sheet. You know who I am." "I thought I did," Elias said. He signaled to the woman in the navy suit. But the woman I knew wouldn't have left a man who worshipped her because he didn't have a high enough credit score. The woman I knew had a soul. I don't know who this person in the $40,000 dress is. He began to walk away, his silhouette tall and imposing against the light of the stage. "Elias!" I screamed, taking a step toward him. "Wait! You can't just leave me like this!" He paused but didn't turn around. Fate has a cruel way of giving us exactly what we asked for, Maya. You wanted to be part of this world. You wanted to be seen. Well, look around. Everyone is watching. At that moment, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. 4 men in dark windbreakers with FBI printed in bold yellow letters on the back entered the room. The guests parted like the Red Sea, their faces pale. The lead agent didn't go toward Julian. He didn't go toward Elias. He walked straight toward me, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Maya Lane?" the agent asked, his voice booming in the silent room. I didn't do anything," I stammered, backing away until I hit the edge of a table, sending champagne glasses crashing to the floor. "It was Julian. He's right there." The agent didn't even glance at Julian. "We have a warrant for your arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent." As the cold metal of the cuffs snapped shut around my wrists, clashing horribly with the diamond bracelets I was still wearing, I looked over the agent's shoulder. Elias was standing by the exit, watching. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. He just looked at me with that same profound disappointment, as if he were watching a beautiful building finally crumble into the dust. But as they began to lead me away, a man I hadn't noticed before, a man in a gray suit who had been sitting at Elias's table, stepped forward and handed a manila envelope to the FBI agent. "Wait," the man in gray said. "There's something else you need to see before you take her in. Something regarding the source of the funds in the Lane accounts." The agent paused, frowning, and opened the envelope. His eyes widened as he scanned the documents. He looked at me, then at Elias, then back at the papers. "This can't be right," the agent muttered. He looked at his partner. "Hold the transport. We have a conflicting set of signatures." I looked at Elias, hope surging in my chest for the first time in hours. Had he saved me? Had he planted evidence to clear my name? Elias walked back toward us, his face unreadable. He looked at the agent and then leaned in, whispering something I couldn't hear. The agent nodded, his expression turning from confusion to grim realization. "Maya," Elias said, his voice so quiet it was almost a ghost of a sound. "I told you that you were wearing my property, but I didn't just mean the diamonds." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn piece of paper. It was a photograph, the only photo we had ever taken together, back when we were happy and poor. He ripped it in half and dropped the pieces at my feet. "The warrant isn't just for Julian's fraud," the agent said, his grip on my arm tightening. "There's a new charge, one that just came through 5 minutes ago." He turned me around, forcing me to face the back of the room, where a large screen was now flickering to life, displaying a grainy surveillance video from a week ago, the night I had moved into Julian's mansion. In the video, I wasn't just packing my bags. I was handing a small black velvet bag to a man in a dark hoodie in the alleyway behind our apartment. "Maya Lane," the agent said, "you're also under investigation for the theft of the sovereign fund's master encryption keys that were kept in a safe inside Elias Thorne's workshop, a safe that only 2 people had the combination for." My jaw dropped. I had never seen that bag. I had never met that man. "That's not me. That's impossible." I looked at Elias, but he was already gone. In his place stood the woman in the navy suit who leaned in and whispered the most terrifying words I had ever heard. "He didn't just want to ruin you, Maya. He wanted to show you what happens when you betray the person who was willing to give you the world. And the best part? The world is going to believe it was you." The screech of tires and the flashing of blue and red lights against the rainy pavement felt like a dream, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The FBI agents didn't treat me like a socialite. They treated me like a high-value target. My wrists ached where the cold steel bit into my skin, and the $40,000 dress I'd felt so proud of was now snagged and stained. They shoved me into the back of a black SUV, but to my horror, Julian wasn't there. He was being loaded into a separate vehicle, screaming about lawyers and conspiracies, his face a purple mask of unadulterated terror. But the SUV I was in didn't head toward the local precinct. Instead of the city lights of New York, we began heading north, toward the secluded, darkened roads that led away from civilization. "Where are you taking me?" I shouted, kicking the back of the driver's seat. "I have rights. I want to speak to a lawyer." The agent in the passenger seat didn't turn around. He was a thick-necked man with a buzz cut, his silence more terrifying than any threat. "Sit back, Ms. Lane. We're taking you to a secure location for your own safety. Things have escalated." "Safety? You arrested me." "We took you into custody," he corrected, his voice gravelly. "There's a difference." 20 minutes later, the SUV pulled through a set of massive iron gates that I recognized with a jolt of recognition. We were back at the estate where the auction had been held, but we weren't going to the main house. We drove down a winding gravel path to a glass and steel structure tucked away in the woods, a private guest wing that looked like a high-tech bunker. The doors opened, and I was hauled out. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, soaking my hair and making the silk of my gown cling to me like a second skin. They led me inside, through a series of biometric scanners, and into a room that looked like a cross between a library and a command center. Standing by a wall of monitors was Elias. He had changed out of his tuxedo. He was wearing a simple black sweater and dark jeans. He looked more like the man I had lived with for 5 years, yet the aura of power around him had only intensified. He didn't look at me at first. He was watching a feed on one of the screens. I followed his gaze and gasped. It was a live shot of our old apartment, the tiny one-bedroom place with the sawdust on the floor. The door to the apartment was being kicked in by men in tactical gear. They weren't FBI. They were dressed in black, unmarked uniforms carrying suppressed rifles. They moved through the small space with lethal efficiency, shredding the mattress where we used to sleep and smashing the thrift store table Elias had built. "They're looking for the keys," Elias said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Who are they?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Elias, what is happening? You said I stole those keys. You told the FBI I was a thief." Elias finally turned to face me. He signaled to the agents, if that's what they even were, to leave the room. They exited without a word, the heavy door locking with a pneumatic hiss. He walked over to me and, with a surprisingly gentle touch, unlocked the handcuffs. I rubbed my wrists, staring at him in a mixture of fear and confusion. "I had to get you out of that ballroom, Maya, and I had to make sure Julian Vance was neutralized," Elias explained. He walked to a sideboard and poured a glass of amber liquid, handing it to me. I didn't take it. "The FBI agents you saw, they work for me. The warrant was a fabrication, but the men at our apartment, they're very real, and they're the reason I spent 5 years pretending to be a carpenter." You lied to me about everything," I said, the weight of his deception finally crashing down on me. "Every wildflower, every one-day promise, every night we spent worrying about the electric bill. It was all a game?" "It wasn't a game," Elias said, his eyes darkening. "It was a sanctuary. I am the head of the sovereign fund, Maya. Do you even know what that means? We don't just manage money. We manage the shadow debts of nations. We are the bank that the banks borrow from. 5 years ago, a faction within the fund decided they wanted to take control. They tried to assassinate me. I went underground to build a counteroffensive to find out who the traitors were. I chose that life. The sawdust, the bills, the quiet. because it was the only place they wouldn't look for a billionaire. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. I wasn't testing you at first. I was loving you. I thought I had found someone who would be my anchor when I finally had to return to this cold, heartless world. But then I saw the way you looked at the luxury cars in the street. I saw the way you hid your magazines of the elite under the bed. I realized that the life I was using to save my soul was a life you considered a prison. So you let me leave for Julian? I asked, tears stinging my eyes. Julian Vance was one of the men trying to find me, Elias revealed, a predatory smile touching his lips. He didn't know who I was, but he knew about the Carpenter legend. He was looking for me. And you walked right into his arms. You gave the enemy the map to my front door because you wanted a designer handbag. I felt sick. Every choice I had made, thinking I was escaping a life of nothingness, had actually been a move in a global chess game I didn't even know existed. I had traded the most powerful man in the world for one of his mid-level henchmen, all because the powerful man didn't show his hand. What happens now? I asked. If the FBI isn't real and Julian is wherever he is, what do you want with me? Elias walked to a large mahogany desk and picked up a black velvet bag, the same one from the video. He opened it and poured the contents onto the desk. They weren't encryption keys. They were a set of old, rusted keys to a workshop and a simple gold band, the ring he had once told me he was saving up to buy. The video was a deep fake, Maya, a little gift from my tech team to ensure the real authorities would stay away while I dealt with you, Elias said. You wanted status. You wanted to be the woman everyone envied, so I'm going to give it to you. He pressed a button on the desk, and a wall of the room slid back to reveal a closet filled with the most exquisite clothes I had ever seen, jewels that made the ones Julian gave me look like glass. From this moment on, you are the public face of the Sovereign Fund. You will be at every gala, every board meeting, every international summit. You will have more status than any woman on this planet. I don't understand, I stammered. Why? You hate me for what I did. I don't hate you, Maya. I'm disappointed in you. And in this world, disappointment is much more expensive, Elias said, his voice dropping to a whisper. You're going to be my shield. The people who want to kill me will see you. They will target you. They will follow you. You wanted to be seen, didn't you? Now, the entire world will have its eyes on you. You'll have the diamonds, the private jets, the ultimate status. But you will never, ever be allowed to leave my side. You are my most beautiful and most dangerous asset. I backed away, the horror of the golden cage finally becoming clear. No, I won't do it. I'll go to the real police. I'll tell them everything, Elias laughed, a dry, hollow sound. With what evidence? As far as the world is concerned, you are a master criminal who just pulled off the heist of the century, and I am the benevolent billionaire who decided to show you mercy by making you his wife. If you leave this building without my protection, those men in the black uniforms will find you within minutes, and they don't want to talk. Suddenly, the monitors behind him began to beep frantically. The screen showing our old apartment went red. The building exploded in a ball of fire, the feed cutting to static. They've realized the keys weren't there, Elias said, his face turning grim. He looked at his watch. We have to move. The extraction team is 5 minutes away. Extraction to where? I asked, trembling. Elias looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. To the only place left. We're going to the island, Maya. but there's something you need to know before we board that plane." He grabbed a tablet and swiped through several files until he reached a medical report. He slid it across the desk toward me. "Julian wasn't just a henchman," Elias said. "He was a carrier, a biological research project funded by the very people hunting us. He's been symptomatic for 48 hours. I looked at the report, my eyes scanning the technical jargon until they landed on the bottom line. My heart stopped. "The virus is sexually transmitted, Maya," Elias said, his voice trembling with a terrifying mix of rage and grief. "And according to the surveillance from Julian's mansion, you were exposed 3 nights ago." A loud thud echoed from the roof. The helicopter had arrived, but as I looked at my hands, I noticed a tiny, faint red rash beginning to bloom beneath the surface of my skin. The roar of the helicopter blades drowned out my screams, but it couldn't drown out the frantic rhythm of my heart. As we ascended, the estate, the symbol of Julian's hollow power and Elias's hidden empire, shrank into a toy set beneath us. I stared at the red rash on my hand, the small, angry blooms of heat that felt like they were vibrating under my skin. Elias sat opposite me, his face illuminated by the green glow of the cabin's instrument panel. He didn't look like a carpenter anymore. He didn't look like the man who had picking wildflowers. He looked like a god of the underworld, cold and efficient, watching his most flawed creation burn. "Is it true?" I shouted over the engine. Did you know? Did you know Julian was carrying this?" Elias didn't blink. I knew Julian was desperate. I knew he was dealing with people who consider human lives to be nothing more than data points. I didn't know he would be stupid enough to infect himself, but I knew he was a carrier of something. Everyone in his circle is. "And you let me go to him!" I lunged at him, but the seatbelt jerked me back. "You watched me leave. You knew I was walking into a plague." "I didn't lead you there, Maya," Elias said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You chose the door. You saw the gold on the handle and didn't care if the room was on fire. I offered you a life of peace and you called it a prison. You wanted the status of the elite? Well, this is it. This virus was engineered to ensure that the secrets of the sovereign fund never leave a certain circle. It's a biological non-disclosure agreement." We landed on a private island in the middle of the Atlantic, a jagged tooth of rock crowned by a medical facility that looked like a fortress. I was whisked away by men in hazmat suits, stripped of my $40,000 dress, and scrubbed until my skin was raw. The diamonds were tossed into a biohazard bin, like common trash. For 3 days I lived in a glass room, the fever turning my world into a kaleidoscope of regret. I hallucinated Elias's workshop, the smell of cedar, the sound of his saw, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. I saw the version of myself who had stayed, the woman who had been content with a hand-built home. And then I saw the woman I had become, a creature who had traded her soul for a label, only to find the label was a death warrant. On the 4th day, the fever broke. I woke up to find Elias standing on the other side of the glass. He wasn't wearing a mask. "You're lucky," he said. "The strain Julian gave you was a prototype. My doctors were able to synthesize an antisense oligonucleotide to bridge the gap. You're going to live." I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. "Thank you. Elias, I'm so sorry. I'll do whatever you want. I'll be your shield. I'll be your asset. No," he interrupted, his voice hollow. "The board of the Sovereign Fund has reached a decision. Julian is dead. The scandal has been buried. And as for you, The Maya Lane, who was the face of the Vance Group, is officially deceased. To the world, you died in the explosion at the apartment. I stared at him, confused. But I'm right here. You are. But you are a ghost now. The price of the cure was your identity. We had to use an experimental gene editing process to flush the virus from your system. It had a side effect. It's rare, but in your case, it was total. He held up a mirror. I reached out with trembling hands and took it. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The woman in the mirror was a stranger. My hair, once dark and lustrous, was now a shocking, brittle white. My eyes, which Julian had once praised for their deep emerald hue, had turned a flat, pale gray. Even the structure of my face seemed shifted, the elegance replaced by something sharp, weary, and unrecognizable. The virus and the cure had stripped away the very beauty I had used as my currency. "You wanted status, Maya," Elias said, and for the first time I heard a crack of genuine sorrow in his voice. "You wanted to be someone. But in this world, being someone means being a target. I've given you the only thing that can actually keep you safe. Anonymity." "Where do I go?" I whispered, my new voice sounding thin and raspy. "Wherever you want. There is a bank account in Geneva under a name you've never heard of. It has enough to keep you comfortable for the rest of your life, not wealthy, not status wealthy, but comfortable. Enough for a small house, enough for a quiet life." He turned to leave, but he stopped at the door. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden carving. It was a wildflower, intricately detailed, carved from a single piece of cedar. He placed it on the ledge of the pass-through. "I built that house, Maya," he said, not looking back. "The one I promised you. It's in the mountains overlooking a lake. It has a workshop and a garden. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever made, and no one will ever live in it." He walked out, and the heavy door sealed behind him. 6 months later. I live in a small coastal town in Oregon. No one here knows who I am. I work at a local library stacking books and helping children find fairy tales. My hair is still white, and I wear large glasses to hide my gray eyes. I live in a small, rented cottage that smells of salt and damp wood. I have no designer dresses. I have no diamonds. I have no status. Sometimes I sit on the porch and look at the newspapers. I see Elias Thorne's name occasionally, the reclusive billionaire who is restructuring the global economy. There are photos of him at galas standing next to beautiful women who look just like I used to look. They are smiling, their necks dripping in jewels, their eyes full of the same hungry ambition that once consumed me. I look at them and I feel a cold, sharp pity. They think they've won. They think they've reached the pinnacle. They don't know that the man standing next to them is a ghost, and the world they crave is a graveyard. One afternoon, a package arrived at my door. There was no return address. Inside was a set of heavy, brass keys and a deed to a property in the mountains of Montana. There was no note, just the keys. I drove for 3 days. When I reached the coordinates, I found it, the house. It was exactly as he had described, a masterpiece of cedar and glass, built with the hands of a man who had once loved me more than his own empire. It was worth millions, a trophy of craftsmanship and devotion. I walked through the rooms, the scent of cedar filling my lungs. It was the status I had always dreamed of. It was perfection. But as I stood in the middle of the grand living room, looking out at the sunset over the lake, I realized the final, cruelest twist of all. Elias hadn't given me the house as a gift. He had given it to me as a monument. I could live here, in the lap of luxury, surrounded by the physical proof of the love I had thrown away. I could have the status, the mansion, the beauty of the design, but I would be the only one there to see it. I was the queen of a kingdom of one. I had finally gotten the house he promised, but I had lost the man who made it a home. I walked to the fireplace, took the deed, and held it over the pilot light. As the paper caught fire, I realized that some debts can never be repaid, and some trades are forever. I watched my status turn to ash, and for the first time in my life, I walked out of a beautiful house and didn't look back. I had nothing left but my name, and for the first time, that was finally enough.